Mark, I want to ask you a question. So, we if you've been listening to the show lately, we do like a whole intro and we do housekeeping and stuff, and we were going to spare you that, but do you want to just record it with us? Do you want to just go do the whole, we'll just do it live? Stan?
That's fine, yeah. I'll stay quiet.
No, you don't have to stay quiet. No, we'll introduce you right away.
Sounds good, yeah.
I consider myself now part of the Heavy Play family, so I got to be in for the read. Maybe I'll have some magic come to me.
There's that, and it's also like, we didn't want you to put you through whatever weird cold open Stan has in mind, but let's just experience it.
It's skillful. This is a skillfully done production. It's very cool.
Hello and welcome to episode 294 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, strategies, and local pros for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from, I looked this up, 18 miles west of my current location, it's the Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
Is it that far? It's that far?
Yeah, it's too far to bike.
It's much closer in my mind and my heart than that. It does take an hour for me to drive from my house to your house, though, which is absurd because we live on opposite sides of one city.
That's true. It's true. And what a city it is. Also joining us today, a very special guest from the lost colony of Roanoke, Virginia. Can't wait to dive into all that lore. It's a new guest to the Dive Down, but a familiar voice for people who listen to some other Magic podcasts, including one of our favorite shows, Grindcast. Joining us today, taking a break from his testing for RCDC and the Magic World Championship. Without further ado, Mark Stanton.
Hey, Stan. Hey, Dave. Hey, everybody. Really excited to be on the Dive Down. Yeah, taking a bit of a break, but excited to be on. A lot of magic in my brain, and looking forward to talking about it with these two fine gentlemen today.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. I'm looking forward to you explaining to me how I can finally be good at magic.
It seems like it's going to take up a lot of our time, this episode.
What are we doing, though? Like, honestly, with our lives, what else should we focus on?
I was 3 pages from the end of Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring with my kids, reading. I had to stop them and go, Frodo's making a big choice right now. We're going to save that for tomorrow. I have to go talk to Stan and Mark. So, cliffhanger. You got to leave them wanting more.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great narrative.
Yeah.
Mark was introduced to us by a very special person in our lives, Randy from Heavy Play.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it so happens that Mark is also sponsored by Heavy Play. And more specifically, Mark's competitive team, Team Rampant Growth, is sponsored by Heavy Play.
Yeah, we are really excited to be representing Heavy Play going into the World Championship. Got a great team with me, bunch of folks, and I'm excited to both be representing myself on the podcast today and the team. We've been hard at work. I know we're going to get into this, but Heavy Play, heavy gaming. We've been heavy gaming, heavy playing for probably about 2 months now, getting prepped up. So excited for it.
You're going to love it. Heavy Play is my favorite card gaming accessory brand. And I'm really confident that you're probably going to score a few extra ELO points at your events strictly because you're using the Heavy Play system.
Having the self-assurance of the enhanced ergonomics, mobility, and protection that Heavy Play deck boxes and card sleeves provides with their unique Equip Mag system. We call that in the industry, we call that priceless. It's worth more than any win when you're walking from table to table confidently, ready to work your way through limited, work your way through constructed, whatever format's in front of you, so you can attach your deck and dice boxes, bundle decks together, carry all your gaming gear in a single hand.
I mean, not to spoil too much what we'll be getting into, but a lot of it is being prepared. And I don't know, a better way to be prepared than to be prepared with your supplies. Great supplies from Heavy Play.
Yeah.
Now, Mark, do you know whether Rampant Growth has a promo code that you'd like to share on this episode?
No, you guys take it forward.
Perfect, because we have a promo code that we want you to use. It's the Dive Down 2024, all one word. And when you use it at heavyplay.com, you'll get 10% off your first order. And who knows, maybe it's going to be the first step in your path in the competitive journey of making it to the Pro Tour and beyond.
So what are we doing this week, Stan?
Well,
with Mark's precious time.
That's true, yeah. We are going to try to fill the lonely week between spoiler season and release date with Mark's help. I don't think we could have done it without him, frankly.
A critical member.
That's true. Today you are. Shane's not here, and I don't know what you did with him, but I'm not going to ask.
And Devin, too. Devin taking a little break.
Well, Devin's knee-deep in Yu-Gi-Oh! This weekend, so...
Oh, that's true. He did go play Yu-Gi-Oh! This weekend. I
So
hope he did well on Edison or whatever they talk about in that world.
Hopefully we haven't lost him forever.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure he'll be back, but big shoes to fill for me personally. So I've got 2 feet, 2 shoes from each of them.
One for Shane, one for Devin.
One of each of their shoes.
They have big feet. I don't know if you've seen their feet. I talked about Shane's legs recently on an episode where I said he had small legs, big shoulders, big feet. I don't know. It's quite an image I'm giving people of Shane, right?
Well, and I've run into Devin a few times at tournaments, and he is quite an imposing character.
He's tall. He is tall.
He is.
Yeah.
Yes. We have not squared up as far as I can recall. Fortunately for me.
I got to tell you something. I don't think it's going to surprise you. I'm short. I'm very short.
Me too.
Oh, okay.
Birds of a feather.
Good. We had the same shirt on too, as was mentioned off pre-roll. So now everybody knows all of our secrets.
Similar beards.
Yeah, similar beards. It's true.
You know?
Same energy.
That's right.
I'm hoping to keep this energy going through this episode because the listener still has no idea what we're actually talking about.
True.
But I'll tell you right now, we've got a couple topics. First, Mark, you and the team, you've been testing with Duskmourn.
Yes.
So we'd love to hear some of your early impressions, depending on what you're able to share, of course. But then I'm also very eager to hear and learn about the testing process. You are playing the regional championship in Washington, D.C. You're also qualified for the World Championship.
Yep.
And look, you're probably the best Magic the Gathering player in the room right now. I mentioned this before. I'm excited to learn from you. And part of that, I think, is kind of using you as a conduit for the knowledge that happens in a testing group.
Sure.
I don't have a testing group, but I'm also really keen to learn about like the role that a testing team and a group has on your competitive success journey, testing and all that.
I think a faster way to say that is living vicariously through Mark. Stan, is that what we're talking about here?
That's what we're doing.
Okay.
Excellent. Happy to oblige. Yeah, it's been, for me, this has all happened relatively quickly. So I think hopefully I'll be able to give both of you guys, as well as all of the listeners, a little bit of a view into what that process was like for me, steps that you all might take on your own journeys. I think, a process of continual improvement is key. It's sort of the ethos of rampant growth. It's been something that I've really started to double down and triple down in the past year or two with Magic. And I think my results have, along with a ton of other factors, good fortune, ability, space in my life for Magic, things like that, tons of confluence of factors. But, if I could point to one thing most specifically and one thing that I had control over, it was preparation and kind of putting in the work and having a team, being part of this kind of environment, has been a big enabler for that. I think, one thing we'll get into some, I'm sure, is the difference between playing Magic kind of on the day-to-day or week-to-week and more being focused in preparation for specific tournaments that matter. That's been a big difference in how I've approached the game in sort of a pre-COVID and post-return from COVID environment. And I do think, again, part of what's unlocked the ability to succeed. Doesn't happen every time for any of us, but I think that's been a big thing for me. And even in some tournaments that I've had recently, times I haven't done it, hasn't worked out so well. So hopefully both to share.
You know what they call that? A tease. That's a good tease. Stan, you want to do a little housekeeping before we get into it?
We must. Because we have a new patron who has joined the Dive Down Nation. Frank M is in the house. Thank you, Frank. We also have a new review. It's a good week for the Dive Down. Randomness Randonymous?
Randonymous, I believe. Yeah.
Randonymous. Randonymous wrote.
It's a great album by Phoenix.
Yeah. Did you know Phoenix put out a new song
Did they?
with Kavinsky? It's just like a remix of one of the songs from the Drive soundtrack. I think they played it at the Olympic closing ceremony. It ruled.
All right.
But this is not about Phoenix. This is about Randonymous, who wrote very generously that our podcast should be on every Magic player's rotation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Randonymous.
If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can support us while playing Magic Online over at Mana Traders with promo code thedivedown_OBX. And that's all you need to know for now.
That's right.
And now, before we really dive into the meat on the bone, the meat on the vine, we do something with every new guest on the show that we have to do with you too, Mark.
Okay.
And it's a little something special we like to call Inside the Grinders Studio. So what I have for you right now is 5 lightning round questions, which I intentionally left out of the show notes.
Because no preparation here.
Yes, and it's because I want your initial response.
Sure.
You can respond with one-word answers, or you can provide more context if you like. But it is a lightning round, so don't take up too much time. Question the first, Mark. What's your favorite Magic the Gathering card?
Days.
We haven't gotten that one before. Beautiful.
It's not a nice answer.
I love it though. We don't have a ton of guests who go default to Legacy first. But
I should clarify. Days while the opponent has a mana event.
Probably the wrong time to cast it, right?
Sometimes it's your only time.
yeah.
It's the only way. Doesn't work as often these days, but.
Question the second. What's your least favorite Magic card?
Chalice of the Void. I hate even saying that, though. I think it's all fair game.
Wow. I like that too, though. I do kind of hate Chalice deep in my heart. I'm also sort of infamous for agreeing with whatever the guests say in the most hated card, because I guess I hate a lot of cards. But Chalice, it does have a special place in the cold areas in my heart.
It was one of the, in my periods of most play, certainly one of the cards that caused me some of the most pain. But also, I think important for development. Sometimes you got to play it yourself.
Yeah, true. Sometimes you got to test somebody if they remembered that they played it.
I was gonna maybe my favorite card, Chalice, when you check them and you win that check.
Yeah, that's the best.
Great.
Question the third. Do you have a favorite Magic format?
Historically, Legacy. Hard to really say that as much these days. I've barely played. Certainly haven't won any games or matches lately in Legacy. It's fun. I like them all, though. I've been playing a lot more Standard recently, as that's been a format more in demand, and been appreciating it a lot as well. So I feel like I'm not giving strong answers here, as I'm sort of contextualizing and saying, all of them. I love them all equally.
No, that's perfect.
Do you have a favorite Magic deck of all time?
Delver of Secrets, Rug Delver, and Legacy. Yeah, probably a consistent theme being established here.
We're getting a picture.
Got to put those days somewhere.
That's right.
And then the final question: what is your best, favorite, or highest achievement as a Magic player?
I think, it's hard to, the first time I did well at a Pro Tour, I think is probably the most validating. I was first going towards the first time I had real success in a large tournament. That was a regional championship. And that obviously felt incredible and opened the door. But I will say, once you start playing at the international level, it's a different ball game in terms of the caliber of opponent that you face. And so I think probably for me, it was Pro Tour Amsterdam, and at least in the constructed portion, having a fairly respectable set of matches and finish, and to be able to feel like, okay, I can actually win these games against legitimately the best in the world, no question, at least at this time. it's a good experience.
Right on. Were you playing Nadu at that event?
I was. It was at the time felt great. I have to say, maybe it wasn't as fun in the aftermath, but a lot to be learned from Nadu. One lesson was play the good card going into a tournament, and in particular, actually, in the preparation for Amsterdam, Nadu sticking out as, when I play this card and this deck, it is easy to win the games. That feeling, something I'm chasing more.
Yeah. I don't know if it's not there in every format all the time, right? Like some people
true.
Some people will tell you that it is. Like I think sometimes you listen to like some pros, and they say play the good cards all the time. You know, like they're kind of like, well, just play the good cards. Like don't equivocate. Don't choose your favorite deck. But I don't think it's always. The delta's not always that big in every format all the time, right?
That's extremely correct, and something that didn't occur to me when I was even saying that. And it's a really good point. I think, towards the idea of these days, I don't really think of myself as playing Magic. It's more preparing for specific events and tournaments. Even in Amsterdam, Nadu was the thing for that tournament. I think, yes, it was obviously busted, but in the month that followed, I played Nadu at a couple more tournaments, and I certainly didn't do as well as I did at Amsterdam. Yeah. I sort of think there's a major element in finding the information for the event in question, and then once it gets out of the bag, it becomes less valuable. Your options change. So yeah, Amsterdam was a situation where there was a clear best thing to be doing. That is not the case in all formats and all tournaments by any means.
Yeah. Do you remember how many mirror matches you had in Amsterdam?
I actually only had one.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And others had sort of somewhat similar experiences. I think it was about 25% of the tournament ended up playing Nadu. So I just, my limited performance was, let's just say, left a bit to be desired. Sure. This is a constructed podcast, so we'll focus on constructed. Anyway, so maybe that helped avoid Nadu until I think I played it third constructed round of day 2, maybe the second constructed round of day 2, something like that. Yeah. It was a Bant mirror, and I played actually the black version of Nadu with, in particular, Fatal Push and Thoughtseize in the sideboard, with the logic being, at the tournament we knew Nadu was strong, but going into the tournament, I don't think we quite knew what degree it would be. Is it going to be 40%, 20%? Are we wrong? I mean, we knew the deck was good, obviously, by that point, but I wanted to have a more well-rounded sideboard package in particular to just see, there are other decks that seemed good at the time. Storm, I thought and continue to think they're a very strong kind of Ugin's Labyrinth deck in Modern, and multiple now, actually, in the post-Nadu banning. So anyway, I wanted to have a more well-rounded deck in the 3-game set. I think most players at that tournament leaned towards, and certainly the format in the aftermath shook out towards Saga, speed, consistency of the combo, no black. That's what I ended up playing in the couple tournaments I played Nadu afterwards. But I lost my comfort blanket of Thoughtseize out of the sideboard, I guess. But sometimes it's right, sometimes not.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Stan, where do you want to hop in from here?
Well, just because Duskmourn is new and fresh, I'd like to start there. In part because the cards are going to be available to players by the time this podcast comes out. And I want to hear what some of the impressions you've had testing the set.
Sure.
Either in limited, standard, or beyond.
Yep.
I'm imagine there's probably some thought going into like if and how Duskmourn might impact Pioneer.
Yep.
With the RC coming up. So maybe we can start there. What have you been doing with Duskmourn? How do you test with the set that isn't officially out yet? And what have you found?
Yeah, well, first off, I am so excited. I think we're within 24 hours, as of recording, for the cards being available through Arena and Magic Online. That's really when, the floodgates open and we can kind of go full bore. But we've been working towards Worlds really since Amsterdam ended. We maybe took a week or two to regroup. but then kind of got people together, figured out who was qualified, brought in some other folks, and really started. There was only so much we could do at the time, but I think we took the stance of the better we can understand standard at this time, the more well equipped we'll be once the new cards are ready. Because obviously Duskmourn is the new set, but it adds 15% total cards to the card pool, something like that. In terms of actual competitive staples, hard to say. I mean, I think Duskmourn looks a little lower powered to me than some of the sets that came before it, but I said the same about Bloomburrow, and there's a bunch of great Bloomburrow cards, so really hard to say. I've been looking at Duskmourn set as every card came out effectively. I like it, from a aesthetic perspective. I think they do a lot of things. It's cool. It's a little campy intentionally, and that's great. I think from a mechanical perspective, they've done some interesting things as well, particularly in Limited. I think that rooms, probably the headlining mechanic of the set, sort of a take on split cards and adventures, but also with a card type that is fitting, but is a little bit, doesn't normally get this sort of play in enchantments. And rooms are sort of deceptively powerful, I think, because there's, again, obviously similarities to split and adventure, but you get both halves always. Is that you have access to both halves always, which is a big difference from adventure, where if you want the creature, you don't get the spell. And it's funny because Callous Sellsword in Pioneer has really been picking up, and that's probably one of the most significant examples of times where you really want the creature, but you need to save the spell and that push-pull. Whereas with rooms, you cast either side at any time and really get two for your value, which is nice, 2 for 1 value.
And is it feeling like Duskmourn? Let us know if we kind of go into stuff you don't want to share.
Sure.
But is it feeling like Duskmourn is like slow enough, grindy enough that you get to those larger cost rooms, or there's decks that are viable to let you do that, or?
So far, I think probably. I mean, there are some decks, particularly Red, which seems to be, at least from some of the other content producers that really focus on Limited, I've been consuming as much as I can from them as well. Some really great minds focused even already with some published content out. Red seems to be pretty strong. Red leans aggressive. The thing with most of the rooms, a common, type pattern will be less expensive room and a more expensive room.
Right.
And a lot of the rooms are removal spells, creatures, they sort of impact the board. So while they may be a little overcosted, they still do enough that you're probably not going to get run down so quickly that you can't get them online. I think most games you will see one or both players have a room, actually, because there's even some off ones in weird colors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the spoiler season and some of the cards that we were talking about on the pod, and one of the ones that stood out to me at the time was the Is It Rare room.
Oh, yeah.
I have it in front of me. I cracked it open.
Very nice. The full art as well.
Isn't that nice?
The listeners can't see it. It is beautiful.
Roaring Furnace, it's called.
Yes.
And Steaming Sauna. And something that occurred to me after the fact that makes these cards even more interesting, I think, is that it puts your opponent in this awkward position whether or not they want to deal with an enchantment that's not doing anything until you've unlocked it. So in the example of Roaring Furnace, at least, a card I've never played, so this is purely theoretical, but you use the cheap version to remove a creature, but then it's just kind of sitting around threatening to be this long-term card advantage engine, and then the opponent has to consider whether or not they want to use something like if it's in constructed, like something like a Leyline Binding or whatever removal spell they have access to deal with this permanent, just because it's kind of threatening future activation. You deal with something more pressing now, and I think that could be true of a lot of rooms if they end up making it to eventual constructed play.
Yeah, I think that aspect is interesting. It sort of means the second half of the room is pretty face up. I think that's probably something that makes them weaker, because it gives your opponent, if it is something that they need to deal with, they have the opportunity to. Too early to say across the board. Most of the rooms, I think Roaring Furnace is one of the better, more likely to be constructed playable rooms. And I'm not seeing most of them getting to that level. Flip side, I think they're going to be the defining mechanic in Limited, or with one or two other pillars, like, for example, Manifest Dread. which is probably the second keystone mechanic in Duskmourn. Not as exciting as Rooms, I think, from a novelty perspective. It is a new play on Manifest, which is sort of a play on Morph, but with some interesting counterpoints, and I think a very fitting name.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's interesting to me about Manifest Dread is that many of the cards give you Manifest Dread, and then there are several that make your opponent do it, and you have to decide how much of a downside that is.
Yes.
As far as letting them have a chance to manifest, basically, which is like, we talked about on the show a little bit when it comes to the card Unwanted Remake.
Yes.
That was kind of like, how bad is it to get rid of someone's good creature to make them manifest into something else? My gut was probably not terrible. It's still removal, but
that card specifically is one on early preview I put into a couple discords and said, hey, we don't have to play Get Lost anymore. But after some input from some other players, after thinking about it more, seeing how Manifest Dread plays out, at least in limited, I think in Constructed, it's even more likely to be damaging. The cost of your opponent manifesting Dread is pretty significant.
Interesting.
My current position on Unwanted Remake, it's effectively unplayable. Any format. Yeah, I think that giving them the Manifest Dread is just too costly in too many of the scenarios. And the efficiency, it's not worth the risk and the cost.
So that means it's possible, potentially, that the inverse can be good, right? So maybe manifesting Dread yourself can be good, is what you're saying. Like, if you have a card that manifests Dreads, that's pretty good.
Yes, definitely. And there are, in terms of constructed applicable Manifest Dread cards, I think there's not a ton of them, but there are a few where that text is printed onto cheaper spells that have other impacts that you might want in a game. And yeah, that's definitely going to be, it's like, it's better than it looks, I guess, is a way to think about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's cool. What else is floating around in your guys' minds as you look at the set for Limited?
Yeah, for Limited, I think and I'm relatively new to playing Limited, attempting to, and to this point in professional play, largely failing, but I have been playing, I haven't been winning. So trying to change that and really thinking about Limited more holistically and changing the way that I approach it.
Just to confirm, do you have to practice this format because you will be drafting it at Worlds?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it will be, I believe, I'm actually not positive on the round by round. If it's not Duskmourn Limited and Standard, we have made some mistakes in our preparation process.
Yeah. Gotcha. So just so everybody knows, the World Championship is October 25th to 27th in Las Vegas, and the format is Duskmourn Booster and Standard Constructed. The thing that I didn't realize, honestly, was that how close this tournament is to the RC in DC, which is October 6th, I think.
Yes.
It's like 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's two tournaments here that you guys are working on that are really close together.
Yeah, there are, and a couple folks on the team in similar positions where, fortunately in my case and a few others, qualified already for PT1 of 2025. So it lowers the value of the RC. A lot of us are sort of going to, if we get first or second, we get Worlds of 2025, which will be nice to put in the bag. But from a PT qualification perspective, not so much available for us there. The way I think about it is there is value in getting a big tournament in close proximity. I mean, I've played, dozens of these events in my career, and a lot more recently even, but still, it'll be nice to shake the rust off. I'm also about 3.5 hours from the location, so it's not a big movement of myself. I have a friend that lives there for some good staying as well. So actually really trying to not overlean into RC preparation because Worlds is certainly the bigger fish. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in Pioneer right now. Duskmourn, maybe not the primary driver. I think Bloomborough drove a lot of it, as well as just natural churn as people start to focus and prepare for this RC tournament. So I've been leaning in.
Not to mention the bands.
The bands. Oh yeah. I should. Yeah. It seems like quite a while ago, but I guess that was probably only a month or so ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of change in Pioneer, and so I've been probably falling a little bit too much into RC preparation, but the flip side of it is up until now it has been difficult to play with Duskmourn. It is not impossible. We've been doing some of it through Cockatrice primarily, but once the floodgates open with Duskmourn, will be there. And like I said, I think from a logistics perspective, for lack of a better term, there's some value in playing it, even though it's a different format.
Yeah.
So did I hear you correctly that Bloomborough is having a bigger impact on Pioneer than some of your initial Duskmourn testing?
From what, I mean, I think the red cards from Bloomborough have just really shown themselves to be powerful. In standard, in the mice in particular. Yeah, Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger in particular, those two. A couple others, sometimes you see some Manifold Mouses running around, more so in standard than in Pioneer. But yeah, those two mice, they're just really well statted red cards.
Yeah.
If you look at Emberheart Challenger, it's a 2-mana 2/2, but a lot of text, multiple keywords, goes well with your theme if you're targeting it, but is just a reasonable creature on its own. I think Bloomborough has driven the rise in red in Pioneer, which has been pretty big for the format.
Yeah, it's like the best Abbot of Carol Keep ever, as we mentioned before. It's got extra toughness, it's got extra keywords, it does all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah, it's a good 2-drop.
It is. And then, the churn in Pioneer from the banning, that's a big thing. I think, for folks just thinking about what deck they're going to bring to the RC, I'm also thinking about what deck I'm going to bring to the RC. My really breakthrough into Pro Magic came through Pioneer about this time last year, playing Is It Phoenix at RC Atlanta. It was a great deck then. I went into testing for this tournament thinking it was the default. I'll try a couple things. I probably won't find anything. I'll be very happy to play Phoenix. I am not happy to play Phoenix. I think I'm kind of away from Phoenix at this point for the RC. I think too many things have changed. I think coming out of the ban, we thought there were 3 best decks. Now there is 1. The path is clear. The other decks have gotten a lot better in the past year. Bloomborough obviously added some prints, but other weird cards as well, like High Noon, which is obviously a very hard target against a deck like Phoenix. But a lot of these decks have gotten new cards, coupled with the format does sort of have a new public enemy number 1. At least it did a week or 2 ago. I think probably what's going to drive a lot of the RC decision making probably has Phoenix as public enemy number 1. Obviously online, if you're paying very close attention, Rakdos Aggro has taken a lot of that premier positioning. It's hard to say. And even now, I think that further developing just red decks in general, aggressive red decks in general. Gruul had a good weekend. I just played a couple rounds in a league before the pod and lost to 2 different red decks playing Sacrifice. It's a new world in Pioneer. So I think this is going to be an exciting RC, certainly more exciting than I think we would have thought immediately coming after the ban, where I think a lot of people would have said it's just going to be 30-40% Phoenix, which I definitely don't think is going to be the case now. And I think choosing Phoenix now, if you're ahead of the game and you're ahead of the game, fantastic. If you chose Phoenix 2 weeks ago and you played it a couple months ago and you're going to roll in and your Ancestral Recall is going to do it for you, I would reconsider the game plan. I'm certainly reconsidering that was my game plan, and I'm reconsidering it personally. So we'll see.
Okay, so just to put a cap on Duskmourn testing before the Dusk Settles.
See what you did there.
Anything you think people need to keep their eye on? Maybe something huge behind the curtain?
The broad strokes, I think, is be aware of red in Pioneer. There are some new red cards in Duskmourn. I think it's very hard to say if they are good or not. Leyline of Resonance and Turn Inside Out are the 2 that most come to my mind. I think Screaming Nemesis is another card poking around. Overall, I think unlikely these cards make major changes, and if there were going to be more red in the metagame, it was already happening anyway. I wouldn't say it was because of these red cards if they do make their way. Besides that, Overlord of the Hauntwoods showing up in 4-color Niv decks and the like. Hard to know how good that actually is. I think the Niv decks also are possibly, they have a lot of removal for red creatures, but they also have a lot of tap lands. So I don't know how viable they are going in. But But across the board, where Bloomborough, I think, brought a very large rise of red in Pioneer, I don't expect Duskmourn is going to bring that level of format shift. Couple new cards, couple new decks, but a lot of things that you'll see in a changed Pioneer, I actually think were happening prior to Duskmourn.
All right, I want to get into the part of the episode that I was most excited to talk to you about. And I actually want to set the stage a little bit. I've been keeping this a secret. It's no secret that I love MTG Grindcast. I've had CCR on the show a couple times. We've done a segment with Lee now. I'm constantly pestering them in Discord. It's just like one of my favorite Magic podcasts outside of the Dive Down, which I think is probably a must-listen Magic podcast personally. Like if the Dive Down is not in your rotation, it should be, as a reviewer said. But you've been on Grindcast a couple times, and I'm being very, very sincere, Mark. You were on one of my favorite episodes of Grindcast. It was after you made the finals playing Phoenix in Atlanta last year. You went into such incredible detail about the work and prep that went into that tournament that it was really inspiring. Like, I don't know how else to put it. And the conversation I thought was also just like very genuine because it seemed to me like you guys had a relationship.
Oh, yeah.
But like, I'd love to now pick your brain on just like the current state of testing, but also just like the work that broadly goes into competitive ambition.
Yeah.
For me personally right now, I've been playing a lot of Modern because it's the RCQ season. I still love the impact that MH3 has had on the format. I really love playing Boros Energy, and I've had varying success in RCQs. I guess you could argue I haven't had any success because I haven't won an RCQ yet, but like I've been doing pretty well online, and I feel like I have a shot. But really assessing like the work that a person needs to consider doing to reach certain goals is something that I think about a lot, and wonder like, am I capable? Is everyone capable of it? And I know that's a broad question, and we don't really have to start there, but like I guess I want to know like where does testing start for you, and then how do you learn and build on that knowledge and
Yeah.
set goals? What are your goals even look like? And
Yeah. Well, I first really appreciate the callback to the Grindcast episode. It was a honor to be on the show. Chris and I go really way back. I won't bore people. Our origin story has been well documented. Chris is a great guy, and we didn't have a testing team going into RC Atlanta, but he played Phoenix. I played Phoenix in that tournament. And many other folks, but Oaf McNamara, Scott, he was another, streamed a lot at that time, also with Phoenix. And so the two of them largely, I think, were leading the charge, and I was in their Twitch chats constantly and just, asking them questions and sharing ideas and playing on my own, sharing my own thoughts. So the idea of, honestly, I think the success for me largely started in some form of a community sense. Obviously, Magic's a very individualistic game, even against teammates. You tell people about Magic and you talk about being on a team, and they say, well, what happens when you're in a tournament and you play against each other? Well, then we're not on a team anymore, at least for that tournament, for that game. So, the what kind of goes into it, and Stan, you mentioned the mindset of, have I had success at the RCQ, I think is one way you described it. My mind went to, well, you have, because whether you have won the tournament or not, you have notched another belt, another notch in your belt for experience. And I think that's, for me, has been critical. Some players are just savants, like maybe, and they just start and they're so good, and they, and those are I think the ones that have the ability to be the best in the world, that level. I don't have those aspirations personally. I would like to do well. I would like to, prove myself to myself largely. But I think all of those steps are important steps along a journey. And a year ago, literally probably, a year ago, I was saying the exact same things that you were saying to myself, because I top 8'd in an open, played 12 of them or something, 15 of them or something. It's sort of like when you do well very rarely, it's kind of like, there's some variance, even if you have a 5% chance to get what you're after 1 out of 20 times, that should happen. But anyway, no, I think for me it was really a mindset shift, and I know we'll talk about that some more.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, what is that mindset? Are you still having fun?
Yes, I think a little bit of a different kind of fun. I think when, at least my journey getting started with Magic was I had, played Pokemon as a kid, put the card games down for a little while. In high school, had some friends, picked up Yu-Gi-Oh! So having some card gaming experience from my childhood, I picked up Yu-Gi-Oh! With them, started playing. It was fine, whatever. Anyway, I found Magic very soon after. Betrayers of Kamigawa was the set that was out, and it was took our group by storm. And so obviously you start playing because the cards are cool and the deck building challenges are fun and your friends are doing it. Well, I very quickly started going to the card shop every Friday night. It had to be there. It was like, because every time I really thought about it, it's like, I don't have that many chances to test myself in these tournaments, and it takes it to get better. So anyway, I was really playing for fun to begin with, but very much for a competitive outlet pretty quickly into it. And that was in, 2005. There was not the same level of access to Magic as you have now. Well before Arena, even before Magic Online was more broadly accessible, and when the way I was approaching it was playing on weekends at the local shop. You do that long enough, you start going to maybe opens, or back in my day it was state championships, things like that. You see people succeeding and you think, can I do that? I want to do that. I want to see if I can do that. And I played for over a decade, played relatively competitive, or at least traveled, didn't make it my primary, always prioritized career, family, the things that, are need to take the primary positions in your life. But really in the return post-COVID, I had some more space in my life for Magic. I was more comfortable and willing to put in the work online. I think playing online is absolutely critical to improving. One thing to say, if you want to get better, play online, especially Magic Online, but even Arena is close. The volume of games, there's really no replacement for that. A lot of other things you need to do too, but a volume of games is important.
You'll also learn the rules better than you ever could have thought possible, for sure, especially from Magic Online.
Which is critical. Every trigger that goes on the stack, and you need to be able to visualize those things so that you can decide the order in which that they need to happen and how every single thing is going to play out in a particular game so you can maximize your chances to win. So I'd say, yes, I still have fun, but I certainly do not play for fun. I think I have fun from seeing the results of work pay off, not only from, tournament successes, but things like this, getting with other players that I know are much stronger than I am and learning, really feeling myself improve at the game. That's why I do it. That's why I've always done it, is because I want to improve myself. I want to prove myself, improve myself. And I think Magic is a very, it sort of takes no prisoners. You have to look at yourself very realistically. You can 0-3, 0-4 a tournament. People do.
You mentioned something to me when we were planning this episode, and I wonder if this is what you're referring to, which was working rather than playing.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Certainly. I think, in most of my time in, my teens and early 20s, when I was, playing Magic, Friday Night Magic was my primary venue, and maybe a weekend tournament here and there. I would describe that as playing Magic. I thought about Magic a lot and looked at deck lists and things like that, but I didn't, outside of those events, really do very much playing, and certainly wasn't practicing. I think at the time, when you're doing fairly well at your local FNMs, you think like, oh, what do I need to practice for? Realistically, if you want to have success beyond, that really, frankly, small arena, again, unless you're a maven or a talent, whatever, you need to put in some practice. You need to look at how you can improve. And I really think even from my earliest days in Magic, I was fortunate enough to find a local group that was pretty harsh on a new player. It was, the early 2000s, people were different, Magic was different. And so they very much told me, what I was doing wrong and all of these things. And I think, nowadays we approach it a little differently, but that experience very much instilled if you're going to make mistakes, people are going to know that, and you need to try and avoid those. Not because you shouldn't be embarrassed by them. I'm very quick to call out my own play mistakes, look for those mistakes. But the reason for that is because I want to not make them again. I want to improve how I play. And so I think that the working mentality is always looking at the game from what could I have done better, not thinking about luck, not really focusing on the outcome if you win or lose. You certainly gain more from losses from a development perspective. It's just, human psychology. But, it varies in terms of, how much space do you have to bring that mindset to the game, because it is an active choice. You don't just do it all the time. I really think every time I look at a new tournament, it is almost certainly not starting from scratch, but I think about it as like, okay, I'm preparing for this tournament, and there are certainly players that are more prepared for this tournament now than I am. So really that repetitive cycle mindset, also being honest with yourself, there's going to be times you don't have the space. You shouldn't try and apply that. And you certainly shouldn't, get upset with yourself if you don't see results, particularly when you're not able to apply that sort of mindset.
So are there specific things that you do when you're kind of transitioning between these modes? Let's say when you're playing a game of Magic versus preparing, like we said, which is the first paradigm we're kind of taking apart here. What are you doing differently?
Probably the starting point is you really have to look at the format and the tournament for which you care about. I don't know that you could really apply this mindset if your local FNM, I suppose, could be that as it's an evolving tournament, your local metagame. Maybe you could think about it that way. But when you're looking at kind of that next echelon, it might be a regional championship. It might be an RCQ season. Maybe that's another way to put it, because that's almost like one large tournament you could think of, because generally there's not going to be major shifts inside of an RCQ season. But for particularly keystone tournaments like RCs, like Pro Tours, I can't remember very many that it was the same format it was for the past 2 months leading up to it, and people just did whatever and there were no surprises. Usually there's a new print, there's a banning, there's new technology for Magic Online, whatever. So you really need to stay very tuned, or at least my process is looking to stay very tuned into the format and the tournament for which you're preparing, and also keeping in mind all of the other competitors are doing the same thing. I think Pro Tour Amsterdam was a fantastic view into this, because Modern changed so drastically, and the release of the set and the Pro Tour were so close together. And at least myself and a lot of the American qualifiers for the event got their qualification with 3 weeks before the tournament too. So for me, it really showed we're all starting day one when that spoiler is out, and who can get far enough ahead. We already talked about it. Nadu at that event was much better than it was even at the next weekend's event, because it was ahead of the time. So the only way you can get ahead of everyone else, or as many people as possible, because at this level, these players are unbelievable, how good they are, how focused they are, how smart they are, how connected they are. So if you want even a chance, because I think at Magic, nothing's ever guaranteed. You're really doing all this work for a chance at success. You have to be trying to keep pace. One thing I said for RC Atlanta, I put in probably the most work I have. Amsterdam maybe eclipsed it, but for duration, the RC Atlanta last year, I had about 2 months to prepare. So probably more work just based on duration, more intensity for Amsterdam. Anyway, I went in thinking my goal is to qualify for the Pro Tour. 2% of the players are going to qualify for the Pro Tour. Have I done more work? Am I better prepared than 98% of the other players? And for that tournament, even from the first round, I thought I was. And I think the end result certainly made that seem like it was maybe a possibility. That was the first tournament where I had taken that approach. That was the first tournament where I could say that, full honesty. Yes, I am one of the most prepared players. So now I try to do that as often as I can. I think when I look back at my player history, I haven't done that. Even since the first, the RC that kind of had my breakthrough. The first Pro Tour I played, I went 3-5, and one of those was a bye. So I did not prepare this to the same level. Now also a Pro Tour is a whole different ballgame.
Right.
I 0-2 to sealed tournament that actually the next day for another format that I did not prepare well for. So honestly, it's nearly been a 1-to-1 equivalency of did I prepare honestly well for this tournament? If yes, result that I'm relatively happy with. If no, I'm not even unhappy with the result because I should expect the result, and it's often pretty bad.
Yeah. So preparation, right? So part of what you talked about is meta knowledge, right? Like understanding, and I'm assuming that includes understanding the dynamics of the meta, like what deck beats what decks and those kind of things. Do you have a way that you break that down so that you can remember it, or how do you capture that? How do you think that becomes a part of your working knowledge when you're operating within the ecosystem that is a format?
Yeah. Building metagame knowledge, it's hard to make an active choice of I'm going to build metagame knowledge. I think that's definitely a constant, or sorry, not a constant, but that's it evolves. It's something you should be as mindful of as you can be. And I think a lot of Magic players, we refresh the Goldfish tournament results page or whatever the, venue of your choice, like other, people read the newspaper years ago or whatever. Right. So it's sort of part of your daily routine. Does that help? I think so. It's not the only thing.
Right.
I think if you had infinite resources, infinite time, etc., you would know everything and played every deck. Obviously, that's ridiculous. In knowing the metagame you obviously want to make sure you're investing your time into a deck that is good. And I would say, my standard process is typically play a little bit with every deck in the format. Obviously, for formats like Modern, for Pioneer, that knowledge can be a little bit more cumulative, but with how often new cards come in. I mean, Pioneer, Duskmourn just put in 4 or 5 new really good auras and maybe Boggles is a really good deck. And you can't say, oh, I know how good Boggles is in this format. Someone needs to put it in. I haven't played it, and I probably won't before the tournament. I've got a buddy planning to play it, and I actually, for the first time in my life, can say I think you're making a good choice playing this deck because I think it could be good.
Yeah.
But here's the issue with that statement. You shouldn't think your deck is good. If you think your deck is good, you have not put in the preparation. You need to know, is my deck good? And how do you know that? You play a lot with a lot of different decks, so you have some general knowledge. But I think you're never going to have, maybe it's not always going to be clear, Dave, like you said earlier, this deck is the best deck in this format. A lot of the time, what I've started doing, in my older days where I played regularly but didn't have success and was I bounced from deck to deck, what won last week, I play this week. At the time, I think and I did it in a sense that this might not be the best decision for this weekend's tournament, but I think this is a good decision long-term for development. And it's, new is the most important word in marketing or whatever. Like it's certainly the novel attracts. So those SCG Tour days, I was regularly playing the deck that won last weekend, not knowing whether it was good or not, and sort of playing it at those venues was most of the playing that I did. So I guess I was expressing it in a little bit of a different way, but it's a lot more costly to drive to an open, play the deck, round 4, realize this deck's not very good, than it is to play one league where that's 5 rounds. And honestly, your opponents are probably more challenging than they are for day 1 of an open even. So, there's just, I don't want to say there's no excuses, because Magic should take up however much space it should take up. And if you can't fit in the leagues, you don't want to fit in the leagues, like play Magic the way you want to, approach the game the way you want to approach it. If your goal is to play competitively, have success competitively, things like, I think my deck is good and I was wrong, it should be very rare that you run into that kind of situation. You just have to put in the work up front, or if you want to again, give yourself the chance for success, putting in the work up front for me has been a critical factor.
How many games do you think it takes you to start to feel comfortable? Do you have something in mind, or is it just kind of a feeling?
It's certainly dependent on format, deck. There's a few things I think early on in Pioneer's inception, when Mono Green was the big, best deck, way before the Karn ban. I had historically not really played decks like that. I had never played KCI, not really a big combo player, didn't play Storm and Legacy, anything like that. So I was intimidated by the green deck's combo lines, but I said, I'm going to force myself to learn this deck. One, I think it's a really good deck right now and will be good, but also I need to, at some point, I'm going to need to be able to play a deck like this. So I have to just force myself to do it. Played it basically until the Karn ban. Didn't have fantastic results, didn't put in as much time and work as I should have for that deck. I think those were some earlier RCs where, I practiced some and prepared some, but it was before I had this, I'm going to really focus my efforts. So anyway, that deck took a lot more time just to learn the ins and out, and that deck really took study of the chain veil lines and things like that. So if it's an archetype, if it's a format you're more comfortable with, it's going to take less. There's really no rule on it. I think, you're going to know yourself. You can't cheat yourself. You can't underdo. You're going to know how much you need. More is usually better. I have had sort of experiments where I've done things like, okay, I'm going to prepare. There was an open earlier this year for SCG and Modern where I said I'm going to play 100 matches in this format to prepare for this event, because I had actually just come off a Pro Tour where I didn't do that and I had horrible results. And I thought, wow, this is a stark, clear, it works this way or this way. So anyway, I ended up getting the results I wanted. I top 8'd one of the tournaments that weekend after playing 100 matches of Modern. And what I did was started basically the first 50. I played 5 matches with this deck, 10 with this deck, 5 with this deck, just bouncing around the format. Then I sort of landed, I played Domain Zoo for that tournament and ended up playing probably 35, 40 matches just with Domain Zoo to try and get a really good understanding of the important cards in the list for this weekend, the metagame, that I'm expecting, and the sideboard and main deck options I'm trying to make there. What are my plans? Have I found a resource, whether that be a sideboard guide or somebody that is definitely good with this deck that I can learn from, put that into practice a little bit. If you had to pick one or the other, I think probably you're better served investing your time into the deck you think you're likely to play. Also, the reality is most people don't have access to absolutely any deck at any one time. You're focusing on one format, you're focusing on one deck. It does help, though, particularly when you play online, when you're putting in the work. Don't just play your deck. Try and play as many decks as you can so you can just get a really good understanding. The best way to, or one of the best ways to learn how to counteract a deck is to play it yourself. It really helps, especially when you're doing things like sideboarding, because you can know what they're sideboarding in because you have sideboarded it in from that side against whatever you're playing. And you can read, you can think, you can have your maps, but there's a big difference between doing it and thinking about it. It's important to balance the two. Lean towards doing, though.
In your professional journey, were there specific level up moments that changed your approach to the game to, that led you to, this working rather than playing mentality? Was it just the correlation between when I do this focus testing, my results are better? Or was it like skills that you picked up that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise that help motivate you to keep this mindset as part of your approach method?
Yeah, I think I had seen a little bit of success earlier on where similarly, I had picked a deck for a tournament, put 2 weeks of practice, ended up doing fairly well in that tournament. In that one, it was more, I need to pick my deck not 2 days before the tournament. I have to pick it 2-3 weeks out and I have to focus and practice. So anyway, that worked. It was a smaller kind of regional level tournament, an SCG Open. So then thinking, okay, that worked fairly well. That was, let me try applying this in more earnest for a more important tournament. That was the RC. That worked. Then I thought, maybe I'm just really good at Magic. Then went into the Pro Tour not applying that mindset and saw, nope, that's not true. So I'd say that was sort of the level up moment, was playing Pro Tour Chicago, first Pro Tour, and realizing, this is a different game. I told some of I think I was talking to some folks there and saying things like, this is it's like a new game, honestly. Obviously it's the same Magic, but the level, what's required, it's a new ball game. So that door opener, and then once I found the team process, I'd say that was probably the actual level up moment. But the door opener, eye opener was probably that first Pro Tour.
Can you give a couple of bullet points about what makes it a different game? What do you think are a couple of things that maybe are concrete things that people maybe aren't thinking about?
Yeah.
Having never been in that experience, what do you think would be the headlines there? Yeah,
I think for one, Pro Tours and similar events, you usually do not have a strong, template to follow. there's a new set has come out. There's been some big change. You can't just go see what won last week. You can't even start from that. So a lot more unknowns going into the tournament. I'd say that's probably one sort of difference from the games themselves and the cards. The players, it's a big difference as well. I think, you'll find great players in a lot of different places. You might run into them at a pre-release. Certainly you play online, you're going to run into a lot of them. At the pro level, everyone that is there has qualified for a pro tour. And I think everyone listening to this podcast, everyone that's played at an FNM, most of them know how hard that is for most players. Certainly some people get there and some people are just so good, blah, blah, blah. But that's really difficult. If you face a player that has accomplished that, the likelihood that they are excellent is very high. So, you're just going to run into players of a different caliber. And again, I want to highlight international. You see a whole new ballgame when you play against international players.
Yeah. And do you feel like they made less mistakes, or they had better angles, or they were working plans faster than you could? Or what do you think maybe were a couple of things that people could imagine?
Probably playing better decks and having better decks, I think, is one of the more likely distinct differences, because a lot of people do put in that preparation. And then, probably the second and maybe even a bigger is the play skill. You're just a lot less likely to run into opponents that have made very obvious mistakes. It's certainly not always the case. I've made plenty of mistakes, even in the 3 pro level matches I've had so far. Opponents have as well, but it's a lot of people bring that same level of prepared mentality, and that manifests in a lot of things that ultimately affect their likelihood to win. So I think nothing is free at the Pro Tour is maybe a way to say that.
Yeah, I love that. You don't get the free points
no.
anymore. Yeah.
No, my first Pro Tour draft at MKM, I'm not sure I dealt more than 25 damage across all 3 matches. My deck was pretty bad, as you can imagine from that. But yeah, you don't get even a point of damage in for free at the Pro Tour.
I want to make sure I know what you mean when you say people are playing better decks, because where I'm at the RCQ level, it's all the metagame, right? Mm-hmm. We're all playing the decks that you would probably expect to see in a modern tournament with stakes. But when we talk about better decks, is it everyone doing kind of the Jerry Thompson thing of I'm going to take a meta deck and I'm going to put my spin on it based on my testing and find a new angle, with Boros Energy being the example there of Jerry putting in Skyclave Apparition,
right?
Is that just kind of what the field is like? Everyone knows the metagame, but they're trying to elevate the strategy as they play it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's certainly not to say that people have, there's never been an instance where people bring decks to a Pro Tour, the deck has a bad win rate, they regret it, things like that. That certainly happens as well. What I would say is the level of intentionality is a lot higher. Both the deck that is chosen, it's not so much card availability, it's not so much pet deck choices. So the deck that is chosen, and then the cards within them, the sideboard, the plans, and how those exist in the specific tournament itself. I think Amsterdam, when I was saying decks with low win rates, the deck I was talking about was Storm. That had a very, very low win rate at that tournament. I don't think that is, Storm was a bad deck and everyone should have known it was a bad deck. It was the probably deck I was most scared of going in with Nadu, besides maybe the mirror match. And you tend to not really be afraid of the mirror match quite so much. That was a situation where people were very much going anti-Storm. So again, that's heavy intentionality from the entire tournament.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think about that when people are crafting their sideboards, and when I play a deck, I kind of have an idea of why the cards are there, right? But I don't have the reps in necessarily to really know about every single place that certain things are worthwhile. And then they're, just as one example, they know why every card is there, every card in every situation that it could be used. And then from that, they're even able to sort of improvise into other situations that maybe they didn't map out, where cards would help them or their plans could change.
There's not really an instance at the Pro Tour where someone is playing someone else's 75 outside of, the team environments, where that's another probably counter or difference. These really well-connected, really, impressive performance, these teams that have really impressive players on them they bring their A game into these tournaments as well. So every few rounds, you might face someone you've definitely heard of who has just spent a good portion of their time over the last whatever amount of time they've been able to dedicate trying to beat you. and a lot of times they're good at doing that too. A lot of times it happens. So your job is to not let that happen and to win yourself. So yeah, that's not the environment at an RCQ. You know, it's just a different level. And I do think, as I mentioned, with that first Pro Tour feeling like the first tournament for me again, I think when you get into that arena, you again open up these doors for development, because it's hard to get there until you get there. You know, I'd say probably a big thing that's been important for me, I compare Chicago versus Amsterdam. Amsterdam, I had a great team, you know, a lot of the same guys we're playing with for Worlds now to prepare with. And for Chicago, I didn't put the preparation in. I had some folks I worked with that didn't put that same level of preparation in. And I think having that was my big thing. When I qualified for Amsterdam, I said, I'm not going to do what I did for Chicago again. I have to find a team. I have to go all in here, because if I'm going to fly across the world for this, you know, I need to give it as much as I can in A game. Finding these guys on Rampant Growth, they're all better than I am. And that has helped me improve. Always be looking for that.
I think this is the perfect transition to talk about teams in general, because it seems like it's a club that you have to get an invite in, and you have to prove that you deserve an invite, and like that's not necessarily true. I'm sure a lot of teams are very inclusive and not exclusionary, but you know, I hear from people like the importance of having a testing team to their individual success. And I believe you mentioned now that like there's some truth to that for you as well. Even before you were on the team, when you were a finalist in RC Atlanta, you created almost like a virtual team with CCR and OAF.
That's exactly where I was going to go with that. Yeah, I think the you know, being part of a team, it's not like NFL level, you know, in Magic. I think a lot of folks, even for folks you're not, air quotes, on the team with for that event, you're likely friends with them. You've played against them. You're probably in a Discord or two with them somewhere. So I think probably the first step all players should look at is building their network, trying to find players that are better than they are, and learning as much as they can, contributing, not being afraid. I think probably a major thing, you know, for me is if I have an idea, I throw it out there. I'm not worried, is the team going to think I'm a worse player? Like they probably already think I'm the worst player. So it's just really don't be afraid to embarrass yourself in that way and be very hungry. You know, I've reached out to folks in the community, obviously been able to network more and more. Some of it, like I mentioned, you can't get there till you get there. I think you need to, this stuff comes naturally as you achieve successes. You play against people, they beat you, you beat them. That's certainly a great way to build a network. But yeah, I think that example of they didn't ask to be on the Phoenix team necessarily. They were just playing a bunch of Phoenix and you know, great guys. And I think, yeah, we did put a little bit of a brain trust together that, you know, did the two of them did fairly well individually in the tournament. And I think, you know, I told both of them like, hey, it was your ideas in my deck. Like I played Fable because CCR said play Fable in the sideboard of Phoenix, and it was a fantastic choice. That was early stage, you know, so maybe networking more important than teaming specifically, because again, for that mindset of these are really preparations for specific events, you know, there's fluidity in these sorts of things. But finding players better than yourself, or not necessarily even that, you know, you might find other players that are very motivated. I think you were talking about how prepared are you guys, or how much preparation have you done with Duskmourn already? We've been playing a good amount of Cockatrice, and I'm not sure how many people play Cockatrice for fun. It is a fantastic application, no shade, actually really great. And a benefit of Cockatrice compared to something like Arena and Magic Online, that trigger going on the stack, you have to say it, you have to change it, so if you're preparing for paper, Cockatrice in particular is probably, maybe your best option. The shuffling happens automatically. You have to verbalize your triggers, be responsible for the game state. Magic Online Arena, hold your hand a little bit more. So anyway, a lot of thumbs up from me for Cockatrice, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to find somebody to play against generally. I'm certainly not going through the open games in Cockatrice and finding what I find. I'm finding another player from the team and saying, hey, I've got this idea for this card in this deck. Can you play some other deck that's like hopefully not totally unhinged itself? You got to be careful about, not everybody just playing new ideas. You get into this echo chamber. But when you're putting in that time with others who are motivated, and so I would look at, with your local groups, with your people you're connected to online, build a little, it doesn't have to even be that many people. You can do it with one other person. Build a group that's preparing for an event and, use that to your advantage, use that for engagement, make commitments. Something that I've tried to do as I've been more and more involved with these teams testing for events is say, I'll bring some booster boxes. I'll schedule our meeting. I'll do something just to keep yourself accountable to being really engaged, with the group, sign up for things, say, hey, why don't we get together? Just be proactive in that, I think is good. And, look to others that you can kind of stand on their shoulders.
Dave, will you play some Modern against me?
I've already told you no.
On Cockatrice, specify.
Yeah.
The first time I played a game on Cockatrice, I think it was like 1999. Has that thing been around that long? I think
I don't know if that long, but it was a long time.
I feel like I played it against people in college. I swear to God, like when Stan was a young child and I was in college and had a beard already.
In 1999, when Stan was in 5th grade.
Yeah, when I was a sophomore in college.
I would encourage folks to check it out. I think both the ability to play with cards, as soon as they get spoiled, you can update the card database and get access to it, and it's the full picture. It's a pretty solid experience. And I do think even if you have the cards available to you in paper and you're sitting with a buddy, the speed you can get through games without having to actually, manipulate the physical cards. It does take some of, we play these games, we love these cards. So it does take a little bit of that away, but I think if you are trying to prepare at the top level, there are players in those Cockatrice streets. So, you got to get into it.
How do you deal with teammates who are openly hostile and refuse to play games with you?
Who are podcast co-hosts.
That happen to be your business partners as well.
Yeah, that can be a little challenging. I think you just have to be open to all perspectives.
Yeah. So we're almost at time. I'm trying to think if there's any other pressing questions that I failed to ask, or if there's any other specific topics that you were eager to talk about.
I think for me, like I've said, it's been a big, the past year in particular with Magic has been a case study in if you put in the time, put it this way, you have to put in the time if you want to open up the door to potential success at the top level. It's been affirming, not just the success, but the fact that at this stage in my game, it honestly feels like 80% of the games that I lose, there was a mistake that I made. It could have been won. And even again, in tournaments that I play, where there are gaps in preparation, it shows. When I prepare and put in as much as I reasonably can, it shows. So I think, the biggest takeaway has been hard work in a game with a ton of variance. I think a lot of players, this is not chess. This is not the better player wins every time. But even in that environment with a lot of, randomness, you can still build discipline and process that can open the door to success. And I think, again, back to Stan, your comment on RCQs, if I was playing Modern right now, I would be playing Boros Energy. I would be playing it with a lot of rings. I've been listening to your journey over the past couple episodes. You are certainly taking steps forward that are getting you towards the goal. when you hit where you want to be, it's really hard to say. And I think as you reach different levels of accomplishment, even the perspective changes. So I don't want to say enjoy the ride. It's a little cliche, but there really isn't a destination in this. And good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I go back to these RCQs. So I played 2 this season. I went 0-2 drop during Nadu, and then I went back post Nadu, and I go back because it's fun. Like, playing 4 stakes is so much fun.
Yes.
And the thing you said where 80% of the games you lose were due to your mistakes, like, that really resonates with me as well. Thinking back on the last tournament, I lost a match to Storm by a turn, where if I got to untap, I could have won, but they stormed up before me. And I know exactly what went wrong. I missequenced with Damping Sphere. I played it first, ran out of mana to cast my own spells. The second spell I wanted to cast was an Ocelot Pride, and that's the card that snowballs, that opens you up to a lot of things. And it's like you have to be cognizant of your own mistakes. And I don't know why, but I don't really salt or tilt. I recognize what I did wrong. I was like, okay, next time you play Damping Sphere dead last, and then you just move on. So
yeah, that's good. I think mindset. Both you didn't. You mentioned that you were a turn away, but you didn't mention that your Storm player top decked what they needed to win. They did their thing. I think the more you can not think about your opponent's plays, or obviously inside the game, you want to always be thinking about that, but luck, certainly not, salt or dissatisfaction. I think you should never be unhappy with a result. You should be, you should evaluate yourself based on your process, your preparation, and you can be unhappy with yourself based on preparation that was poor, that led to a poor result. But, if you didn't prepare well and you had a poor result, you shouldn't be unhappy there. And so far, I can consider myself fairly fortunate, I guess. Hope this doesn't change. I have not yet run into a situation where I can say I prepared really well and had a horrible result. That's, maybe that changes. Hope not. World biggest tournaments of my life coming up very soon. So, so far,
keep this heater going just a little bit longer.
That's right.
Yeah.
but like, do you acknowledge like that could happen too? Like,
it totally could.
There is always luck in Magic.
100%. It totally can happen. It can happen to the best in the game. And I think that's why I keep going back to the potential for success. The Magic is extremely volatile, and results can be, one card difference is a huge qualification versus effectively nothing. And it's a privilege. It's a lot of good fortune, certainly, to be able to be in this sort of position. And plenty of better players played more and didn't get it. And, that can happen. How do you grapple with doing everything right and then still not getting the result? I think I would really look at the premise of doing everything right. I think it's just impossible. There's an old quote from, I think, John Finkel, was something like, "No one has ever played a perfect game of Magic." Even in the one-turn game that you should have not grimaced when you looked at your 6th card, whatever, there's something you could have done better. And that's what you should be focusing on. The results are great when they happen, less great when they don't, but, focus on that self-improvement. Did you get better? Is something there did you do everything that you could have done reasonably? And I'd say probably even before any of that, step back and ask, what do I want from Magic? There's so many different things that this game can be. For many years in my life, I wasn't prioritizing it in this way. I was prioritizing other things, and looking back, I think those were the right decisions. I'm not the type of person that went all in on Magic. And in hindsight, again, I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm very, just very thankful, grateful for everybody that's been involved in the process. I had many friends, even back in the Phoenix testing, that were with me in Discords for hours and hours playing matches. And, they weren't even playing the tournament, but they were just kind of supporting me and just being around. And it was fantastic. With all of that, I think it's just, again, it's steps along the journey that get you to those different places. And you need to just think, where do I want to go? Is this the right time? Not overly attach yourself to the result, and just give it the time, give it the space, And I think it's just a great example. If you apply a good process, and back to the earlier comment, there's not a set number of matches. There's no hard and fast rules to this. Just be honest with yourself. Did you put in the time? Did you put in the work? That's the most important thing.
Mark, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, wisdom, and experience with us. This was amazing.
Happy to do it. Really enjoyed it.
Any plugs that you'd like to share with our listeners, where they can find you, anything they should do to look you up or find your work online?
Yeah. I am not the most active on Twitter, but I do have a handle. Feel free to give me a follow. It is Mark_MTG, M4RK_MTG. I'd say for plugs, if you're at RCDC, feel free to come by, say hello. Would love to talk Pioneer or Standard. I'll have a Standard deck. You're ready to battle. I'd love to get some reps in. And bigger thing, root for the players on Team Rampant Growth Heavy Play at Worlds. If you're at Vegas, feel free to come by. I think everybody on the team is obviously super excited, happy to chat. We're keeping a little more close to the vest our thoughts on the standard format and limited format specifics as we prepare for that event. But as soon as deck lists go public, at least for me, I'm ready to chat. So certainly always love running into folks at events. If you're looking to build up your network, feel free to consider me part of it. Send me a deck list. I'll give you my thoughts. Just been appreciate again, Dave and Stan, for you guys inviting me on. Big fan of the pod myself, and looking forward to being part of the Divecast, the Dive Down extended universe. I'm already part of the Grindcast extended universe. Maybe some merger, and we've already talked about some pieces. Perhaps it is all one extended universe.
Our universes are constantly colliding. I'm just, anything CCR does, I'm just trying to steal from his good ideas usually. So
Hey, it worked well for me.
That's right. And with that, let's wrap up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to our podcast, you can tweet us at The Dive Down or email thedivedown@gmail.com. You can also support our show on Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. Check out our sponsors, starting with Heavy Play. Use promo code TheDiveDown2024 to get 10% off your first order at Heavy Play for some incredible deck and dice boxes and playmats featuring the Equip Mag system. They just introduced art playmats. Art playmats from Heavy Play. They got the magnets and they've got art now. What can't they do? Also, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring the Dive Down. Sign up for Mana Traders using promo code TheDiveDown_OBX. All one word, for 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and work hard, play well, and win forever!